Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Joseph Pagoda. I have a PhD in history, so not a medical doctor. I'm a professor at the University of Houston. I'm also a graduate student right now at Loyola University Chicago studying bioethics and healthcare policy. One of the classes is justice in healthcare, and in that class, we have an assignment to interview an activist, a healthcare worker, just someone that we identify as working toward greater justice for healthcare. And so for this assignment, I'm interviewing Keith Muise. Lives in Canada. He's an activist on Twitter, on Facebook, and elsewhere, and raises awareness for COVID and spreads information about what's happening with COVID. So please enjoy the interview, and it'll start right now in a second. There it is. I found record. Okay, it's going. Cool. Okay. So, I guess to start, if you could please tell me kind of, who you are, a word about, kind of where you live, anything you'd like to open with for this interview.
So, my name is Keith Muise. I am a teacher by trade, a mental health advocate, a COVID safety and awareness advocate, and I live in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. The furthest east you can get in North America, pretty much, closest to England. And yeah,
I was looking at the map this morning where you live, and I was like, wow, that really is. You're way over there.
yeah, we're almost over there. Yeah.
Cool. So I've been following you on Facebook and Twitter for a while now. You're a really great community organizer, an activist for raising awareness for COVID or SARS-CoV-2. And I'm curious how COVID first came to your attention and kind of what your initial thoughts were whenever all of this first really started being a thing.
Well, I mean, I noticed it right away. For some reason, I was paying attention to the news back then, and I was hopeful. I just thought it was going to be one of those, another flash in the pan sort of thing, like SARS was back in, early
Right.
2000s. And I was like, okay, well, they're going to handle this, right? So, oddly enough, I had just watched the movie Contagion, and I was like feeling pretty confident that the CDC was going to come in Lawrence Fishburne style and take care of business and shut this thing down and Dustin Hoffman kind of
Sure.
break style. And I was like, this isn't going to be a thing, like a worldwide thing. They'll handle this. They always handle this. And unfortunately, they did not handle this.
Yeah, I mean it's been real surprising. When did you first start using your platforms to raise awareness and why those platforms?
So I started mostly using Facebook. So back in the early days of the pandemic, there wasn't as much of a lockdown on COVID information. So here in Canada, we can't even share news stories anymore because of a squabble between Meta and news stations and our
Um,
Canadian government. So it's very hard to share it on Facebook now, but in the early days, it was pretty much the hotbed for information for most people because at that time, more people were more receptive to COVID info and they were, looking for it more, right? So I didn't really use Twitter or X as we know it now. I didn't really use that platform for COVID information as much or Instagram.
right.
I kind of got into that later once I realized people were sort of, very against COVID information on Facebook and other ones, right? So
Sure.
um, I sort of focused on Twitter and realized, okay, there's a lot of people here who are one more knowledgeable than I am, and I didn't realize how many scientists and medical experts and researchers and everything else use Twitter because I'd only used it sporadically for mental health awareness and things like that,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. With the Twitter, I first got on it in 2013, and I was surprised that there were professors, historians, politicians, that it was kind of this secret community almost
Yeah.
of academics and researchers and people who cared about those topics. And it will
Big
always
time.
be Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll never call it X.
Forever and ever Twitter. Okay, what kind of responses do you get on social media, and how do those responses make you feel, especially maybe on Twitter now, as things have kind of heated up and there's a lot of resistance whenever any mention of COVID comes about?
Well, I mean, it goes with it's kind of like tides. Like when the waves come, the waves of bots and the waves of attacks and the ways of misinformation, disinformation start coming. I'm pretty automatic on a block. So certain things is automatic block. So if
Yeah,
I'm posting on Facebook and somebody puts a laugh emoji on a post about, a bunch of people dying or suffering from long COVID, they're automatically blocked. Doesn't matter who they are. Like family members, I don't care. And I respect people and I respect life. So if people are that, mean hearted, then I just don't have any time for it. But
sure.
as far as feedback, I've gotten everything from death threats to we're coming to your house to get you kind of thing, and to people supporting me in every way, shape, or form. Right. So in the various fundraisers that I've done or campaigns that I've done, I've gotten loads of support. But again, it's on both sides of the spectrum. Right. You're going to have people just randomly like, hey, I just donated some money to you to keep, in the fight, keep going. And then I get other people like, you're going to die before New Year's kind of thing. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I hope not, but,
It's scary sometimes. The
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's unfortunate that people are so passionate in that direction because, while
Mhm.
I am a COVID advocate and a safety advocate, and most of the people I know on Twitter are in the various communities, none of them are to the point where we're like, we're going to kill you if you don't wear a mask, right?
Yeah.
But we have people like, attacking people for wearing a mask. So it's kind of, it's too bad in a way, but it comes with the territory sort of thing.
Sure. I think I've blocked at least 3 or 4 people already today on Twitter for just,
Oh yeah.
dumb replies and attacking me for different things. So,
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the tens of thousands, right? And it's not like we're still in high school where you have to put up with the bully, unless they get expelled or something.
sure.
If you're going to try to bully people on social media, all it is a click away, right? And you can make a new account, we'll block you again. Like, and that's not to say that I don't welcome debate.
Yeah.
Um, if I can be enlightened by some new information, I'm welcoming of it. I want it, right? I think most of the COVID advocates that I know want to be proven wrong every single time
Hmm.
they log on somewhere, right? So it's not a thing where we want to win the argument. We want to lose this argument because someone goes, hey, we got a cure or we got a new vaccine or
Right.
COVID actually just became mild, and we'd be cheering for it, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. I know you're a big advocate of masks, air filters, vaccines, other preventative measures. Why are those important for people to consider and to adopt for COVID mitigations?
Well, I mean, masking is the easiest one to implement, and it's something that anybody can do, right? Some people can't afford, more expensive masks.
Right.
But as we learned from a lot of different studies, even if you're wearing a cloth mask, it's better than nothing. But there are programs out there. There are ways that we can, get people masks who need them. But for the advocacy side of it, if we're asking governments to pay for that, spend our tax dollars on something
Yeah.
that we need, then masking is one of the easiest things to implement, right? Now it's very hard now logistically to implement because we do have such a pushback on masking because of the optics, because of it's a very visible strategy. If you change the air systems in a building, you don't really see that. You might feel it.
Hmm.
You might notice a drop in sickness or whatever else, but you're not going to see the difference. The difference is right on your face, right? If it's masking. So that's why masking and the clean air and the isolation and things are so important. It's because it takes the whole Swiss cheese kind of method is the only way that we can really control COVID. That's how we did it in 2020, 2021, half of 2022. And if we know how to do it, why not do it, right? So
Sure. That's a really good point about the visibility. Like I was thinking, even vaccines that, it's visible at that moment to whoever may be seeing you get the vaccine, but the mask is, very permanent, very visible, very prominent symbol that things are different, that, there's
yeah.
danger out there.
Well, it's in the way that the different methods of controlling COVID were politicized, right? So right
Hmm.
now, vaccines is probably the most politicized, the most polarizing issue because they were mandated in a lot of places, and people couldn't
Right.
do things if they didn't do them. Right now, masking was the same sort of mandate, but there's that bodily autonomy where people are like, oh yeah, I had to put something in my body to be able to do
Yeah.
the things that I was used to doing. Now, you have the arguments on the both sides. I won't get into those. However, like you said, you don't see who has a vaccine. It's not like you take it and then you have like a blue
Yeah.
dot here, right? It'd be great if we had that for COVID. If everybody who's
So
infected is like,
that's
your temples turn blue for 5 days, it'd be like, yeah, we could avoid it way easier. But it's that optic thing, right? We are in a culture, in a society where the way things look is sometimes more important than the way things actually feel or are, right? So if you're not looking cool, if you're not in with the
yeah.
ink, we've all been a victim to it. We've all succumb to peer pressure for the way things look or the way we do things, right? But this, for some reason, the mask is the hill to die on, and unfortunately, because of its effectiveness and how wide open it leaves people, a lot of people are dying on that hill, right?
Right.
Um, because the efficacy of it has been attacked.
Right.
Right from the start, masks don't work. They actually do, right? There's no argument about, well, we've all heard, well, it's like trying to stop mosquitoes through a chain link fence. We've heard that a
Mhm.
million times. If the chain link fence was built by these companies that have the technology to stop mosquitoes with woven fibers and things like that, then the mosquitoes would not get through. Mosquitoes aren't getting through a mask, right? So yeah.
Yeah. Great points. Thank you. Let's see. What are your thoughts about when people say during the pandemic? That I hear that more and more, and to me, that always yeah, I am surprised and concerned, and have a lot of thoughts about that. And I'm curious, kind of, what your thoughts are when you hear that.
Well, because it was put out there and it was perpetuated by our leadership, right? So we're at a funny stage in society where people are so rebellious, right? They're like, we don't follow the man. We're
Hmm.
not gonna go and don't listen to the government, man. And it's like government says, hey, COVID's mild now and you don't have to take any precautions. Woohoo! We're gonna follow the government, man. We're gonna follow them. And it just doesn't make any sense. It's like,
Right.
but I thought you guys were like against the government, but they just told you to do something, you all did it without any notion, right? So if you're looking for relief from any kind of stress, and someone can provide it, regardless of if that relief or that strategy is actually beneficial to you, you're probably going to take it, right? It's like if you're feeling
Hmm.
depressed, your friend will be like, "Let's go to McDonald's and slam 6,000 calories," and
Yeah.
you're like, yeah, that's what I need to do, right? Or let's go for a drink. Let's have some drinks and we'll forget our troubles. Yeah, it's temporary and it's like whatever. So then when we go, okay, pandemic's over. Joe Biden walking through an auto factory. The pandemic is over. And it's like,
Yeah.
Joe, what are you doing, man? But people needed to hear something and they just clung to it, right? Because it's a lot harder to face the actual reality of the fact that this pandemic's probably going to go on for years and years more.
Right.
And we're probably going to see other ones if we don't do something, right?
Like the bird flu or any number of different ones that are coming up again. Even the way the monkeypox virus is, they seem to kind of I can't think of the right word right now, but has you kind of mutated from
Yep.
what I've seen, and that
Yep.
there's new concerns. And really good point about how that people are for or they're against the government, depending upon how it aligns with their hopes, fears, whatever they want at that moment.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's part of being human. I mean, we back people who are going to give us what we need, what we want, right? We're very selfish. There is a great deal of community in the global community, just territorial community, whatever. But when it comes down to it, we are very selfish, right? Like
Right.
there's lots of times when humans are selfish, and I mean, you have to be selfish to survive, right? You just can't be like, hey, I'll give away all my food. You won't have any food to eat. But like you said, when it comes to who's going to make me feel good? What strategy is going to make me feel the best? Like I said, they're picking that. Let's go for drinks instead of, hey, let's talk about our feelings and why are you depressed and is there anything we can do? So then we go for the quick fix, and the quick fix in this case was pandemic's over, and then media jumps on it and they start using the back in the pandemic and after the pandemic, and it's
Right.
it's not truthful, but I mean, people needed to hear it and they're clinging to it, right?
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I mean people have feelings and that they're not rational, the feelings
No,
that
and
we
it, and
have.
it, it ticks me off too, right? Like, obviously. I mean, this would be like telling people, you have a 5 alarm fire burning in a building, and the firefighters are in there fighting it, and they doubt the fire in a couple of rooms, and then the chief goes, "Yeah, the fire's over,"
Yeah.
and the firefighters are standing there covered in fire, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't know, man." And then the public's like, "Get out of our building! There's no fire. We were told it's over," and it's like,
Mhm.
that's kind of how it feels when you're advocating, against such a strong misinformation, right?
Sure. Yeah. Good points. Thank you. Let's see. What sources do you consult for your research? I see your videos and your tweets, and there's data, there's information. Where do you get that information?
Just basically anywhere. I mean, that's where the Twitter world comes in handy, right? It's you have a bunch of amateur researchers, you have a bunch of professional researchers, and they're all sharing everything, right? So it's like you're wondering things, and sometimes I ask, flat out, "Hey, do we have any info on whatever?" Right?
Sure.
It's a pretty good network of communicative research sharing, right? So places like the Canadian COVID Hazard Index is a big one. Obviously, they synthesize all the data that we're getting for wastewater readings in the different provinces. And then you have your individuals on Twitter and different social media accounts who are sharing those things, right? So Canadian government, CDC sometimes when
Hmm.
they're telling the truth. World Health Organization. I've
Right.
referenced pretty much everybody as long as it's they're not leaving out something like airborne transmission, right? Like we saw with World Health Organization and CDC and everybody on the planet, sort of deal.
Sure. Good. Thank you. Let's see. So whenever we see the hospitals across the United States and Canada, I believe too, and have dropped their mask requirements and have kind of seemed to be rewriting the past and pretending that COVID was never really that bad. Or what are your thoughts about how that's changing and kind of how the hospitals and schools and governments are not doing things that they should be doing and kind of what do they need to be doing?
Well, the masking has to happen right now, everywhere, right? So every essential area that people have to go, there should be universal masking. You should not be able to walk into a school without some form of protection, right? So if the entire world was covered in some kind of chemical where if we breathed it, it could cause brain damage and damage
Right.
our hearts and our immune systems and our lungs and livers and everything else. If there was a pathogen, a chemical from a factory that was floating around that if you breathed it in once you could get type 1 diabetes, right? We would definitely not take that risk.
Right.
So if we're in a world where you got to wear a hard hat to be on a construction site and you have to wear steel toe boots, your seat belts, helmets when you're riding a bicycle, right now more people are sustaining head injuries, brain damage from COVID-19 than there is from the history of bike injuries, right?
Right.
So if that's a rule in some places, then it definitely should be a rule that if you're going into public, especially essential areas, I'm not talking restaurants, I'm not talking bars. If somebody wants to take that risk, that's up to them, right? But there's places that people have to go, pharmacies and the post office and the
Yeah.
grocery store, schools, hospitals. And the biggest issue that I have with anybody who has abandoned those things is that especially healthcare, the precautionary principle was the building foundation, it was the bedrock of modern healthcare. Assume everybody's infected. You don't just take
Right.
blood from everybody and share it with everybody. You test it first. You wear gloves.
Yeah.
You change syringes, things like that. We did all that stuff from the learning curve of decades and decades, and then all of a sudden, all those things that we valued that kept healthcare as effective as it was out the window, and no explanation given, right? Because it's not only
Mhm.
dialing back with COVID measures and COVID strategies and COVID um, rules and regulations. They're dialed back so far. We're even taken away from other regulatory
Yeah.
practices, which really doesn't make any sense, right? So, yeah, that one's very, very concerning, and it's the
Uh-huh.
environmental evidence, the observable evidence that you can see in places like healthcare. Obviously, they know they're swamped, right? They know this. And then you go to schools, teachers, principals, they know that there's more kids sick and they're sick for longer and they're
Mhm.
repetitively, like they know this. So why is nobody going, hey, why don't we go back to masking? Why don't we go back to isolation like we were doing in 2020 and 2021? Because COVID was
Yeah.
around. It's just we tried to control it, right? So it's very concerning.
I see posts from our local schools saying we need attendance up, that, you send your kids to school, and
Yep.
it's just, yeah.
But schools aren't, the goal of schools isn't to get attendance, right? The goal of schools is to provide education. And every health
Yeah.
act and every education act, in the modern world has some sort of a code that says you have to provide a safe education. Now,
Right.
some places don't care about that. It's like whatever, we open the schools, but it's written down somewhere, almost everywhere. But people are just ignoring it. And it goes down the line. It goes from administrators down to teachers, down to everybody who's involved in the advocacy and the care and the education of kids. It's not like a teacher just can't say, well, I didn't know. If you saw black mold in your classroom and you didn't tell the principal and a
Yeah.
bunch of kids got sick, you'd be in trouble. Or if you told the principal and the principal said, it's only black mold, it's good for the kids, something happened, they get in trouble. Well, the same thing. Why is COVID not a big deal when we see all these kids sick, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm thinking more about children. One of the first thoughts I had, early on in 2020, 2021 was these children aren't consenting to have their futures potentially drastically altered. And so, like, what do you think about children and their rights, and that they're not consenting to these conditions, and that they don't know enough? They can't know enough yet. They're just children.
Well, that one's like, that's pretty much my driving fire, the force behind my advocacy. It's unfair. If this was something that we didn't know any of the damages, and it was like, years later, and
Hmm.
oh my God, I can't believe that this happened. We didn't know. We know, right? So the whole ignorance card cannot be played anymore. We have enough information. We heard this during the first couple of years of the pandemic, where it was,
Right.
well, we don't really know the impacts on kids. Now, we knew right away that the whole notion that kids can't catch it, that was told to us by medical
Yeah.
professionals with a straight face. We all knew that was baloney, right?
Never
So,
made sense.
no, I mean, if, kids can catch anything, an adult can catch almost, right? So, right from that, those statements, we knew, okay, there's something going on here when it comes to the protection of kids.
Right.
But then they put in mandates and they put masking in schools and they, did things to protect them. They closed down schools when they needed to, and whatever else. However, since then, we've even seen examples of jurisdictions saying, the kids will catch COVID and spread it to
Yeah.
the adults at home. We've seen that. So if that isn't indicator enough that something diabolical is going through the ranks of decision makers, I mean,
Hmm.
that should warn and scare and concern any parent when they hear, if it happened
Yeah.
anywhere in North America, anywhere UK, why doesn't that concern you that somewhere a provincial government, like I think it was in BC, had studies and knew the kids are getting it at a rapid rate, they're going to spread it to the adults, and they just let it happen? Why wouldn't that concern anyone, right? Even if it was just the flu, right? So if before COVID, if someone came to me and said, well, we knew everybody, 10 kids in the class had the flu, we just didn't feel like telling you,
Yeah.
we would have an issue with that. And most parents would, right? So why is COVID, which is definitely not the flu and much more, dangerous, why is that allowed to, are kids allowed to be vectors for that in some sort of a, hey, let's see how quick they can spread it experiment? Like, it just doesn't make any sense.
I think if people, especially parents who, presumably, very, very deeply love their children, knew
Yep.
more accurate current information about COVID, that they would be very upset, and they would be demanding much better conditions for their children.
Oh, big time. I mean, and that's why, one of my main points of my advocacy is education, mitigation, air filtration, right? I've been saying it over and over again.
Lovely motto.
And it's alliteration, right? Or no, it's not.
Yes.
No,
It's
it's
close. It's kind of
rhyming. It's rhyming.
rhymes.
There we go. It's
Yeah.
rhyming. Yeah. It's a rhyming sensation. That's what it was. It's not alliteration. Yeah. So I kept saying, we need to educate. If we educate, that's half the job, right? So You
Yeah.
don't need to convince everybody to wear a mask again. As you know, it won't be as hard of a job if you educate them as to what the true dangers are. If they think it's a mild virus, it's just like the flu, they're going to be like, well, whatever. We used to always have the flu around. However, even if it was the flu, flu every 7 years ish, average person gets it. Like, it's you don't get the flu every year. But again, there
Right.
comes the education piece. People don't understand that. They're like, every time I was ever sick was the flu. And it's like, no, it was not influenza. You probably had a bad cold or whatever.
Hmm.
But, if you were getting the flu once a year, twice a year, you'd be in rough shape, right? So, again, if we put that education piece in there, people are going to go, I don't want to catch this over and over. I mean, that's how we got, the smoking rates in
Right.
North America down. Took 60 years or something crazy. We don't have that with COVID. We don't have 6 years, right? So
Right.
we really need to get that info out now so that people go, just like at the start of the pandemic when our leaders told people this is really bad. You don't want to get it, and this is what can happen. They need to hear that again, and they need to hear that
Mhm.
we hoped it was mild. We were hoping it mutated to be less damaging. Unfortunately, it didn't. We have, less acute deaths, maybe, but for the most part, this is a very damaging virus. Then people will go, well,
Yeah.
we're not going to, go maskless anymore, or we're going to make sure our kid stays home when they're sick, or we're going to stay home when we're sick, or we're going to demand our workplace give us, more sick days, or we isolate properly, or whatever, right? So,
My concern is still that the way things are going and the long-term side effects of COVID and all the misinformation about COVID, that it could easily be, if it's not already, an extinction-like event. That, I mean, people aren't going to be able to have children, people aren't going to live long enough. That it's could be very tragic.
well, I mean, global birth rates were dropping anyway, right?
Right.
So COVID is well known to affect sperm count, reproduction, neurological development of fetuses, the fetus itself. It can be passed through in utero. Like there's so many different avenues for this virus to make sure that the seedlings of humanity are they're stopped basically,
Right.
right? So if we have life expectancy going down, if we have extra strain on healthcare, we have more people dying of preventable things. We have kids having their neurological development and their organs and everything else during the developmental stages of life being impacted. How could it not be an extinction kind of path, right? It
Yeah.
has to be because we're not going to be able to reproduce. We're not going to be able to take care of the people we have. We're going to have a ballooning number of people who have chronic illness, disabilities. The impact on healthcare for the people who are somehow staying away from COVID. If you get something else, you break your foot, you're going into the lion's den. You might catch a virus there. It's a whole big like it all just fits into each other like a Lego set, right? And it's
Right.
all unfortunately not in our favor. Like, what do we have going for us right now as a species, right?
Right.
We have information, we have the ability to share it, but we're not doing that. So, in the absence of our willingness to share that information, we have people who are infecting themselves with a virus over and over and over, literally cutting down on their ability to, their cognitive abilities, right?
Mhm.
So if you literally can't, use your mind to think about something, to, take in a concept, then you're in deep trouble because you have the physical, the mental, the drop in intelligence. You got the drop in reproduction. You have different viruses taking advantage. You have the animal kingdom is now infected with a couple of different viruses going around. So like COVID is in the
Yeah.
animal. It's could any day now. It could be like, whoops, it just mutated in the animals, and there goes
Hmm.
flu, right? There goes whatever. It's just such a ball of chaos. I mean, it's hard not to think that, okay, this, you don't want to be too doomsday-ish, and
Right.
the world is ending or whatever, but species die off. It happens, right?
Yeah.
And they go through trouble. Like every species that ever existed didn't just appear and then have smooth sailing. We had the Black Plague, we had Spanish flu, we had a lot of things. Right now, will we adapt as a species to combat the attack on reproduction and neurological development in our young? Who knows, right?
Yeah. And there's so many different variables that are kind of like all colliding at once. And I think I saw just recently a new past week or two post from a physician in Canada on Twitter that their ER was level full again and they didn't have room for anybody else. And that kind of thing is common that
Yeah,
ERs being overburdened.
all year round, which is the bigger issue, right? Because they're equipped to deal with that. In the winter months, it's always been pretty busy, right? But now it's all year round. There's no
Right.
reprieve. There's no break. So you have healthcare workers who, at sometimes, they'd have a peak of, strain, and then it would drop. They'd get a little breather. Now you're not getting that. So what's going to happen to those healthcare workers? More of them are going to get sick. They're going to get burned out. They're going to retire early. They're going to die. Whatever else. Then again, you're leaving a void of need. And how are you going to replace it? Oh, well, we'll just have
Yeah.
more kids. Oh, you can't do that, right? So if you're fighting a war against any enemy and you're poisoning the well, you're destroying your food supply, your weapons are almost useless, or you're not
Right.
using your weapons, you can't win that war. It's impossible, right? And then on top of all that, you have people thinking the war's over, and other
Yeah.
people saying the enemy is nice, right? Like, how do you win that kind of a battle? It's rough. It's a sci-fi movie on Red Bull, right? It's
Yeah.
terrifying when you really think about it, right? But we got the tools. Are we going to use
Right.
them? We have the intelligence. We have the ability to share the info. We have the know-how. How much more is it going to take for us to actually kick in DEFCON 4 and take care of business like we know we can, right?
Yeah. It seems like the kind of a common thread that I hear you articulating is kind of like a lack of planning is a big part of the problem. That people not being willing or able to kind of plan and think ahead in the future.
Well, and that's the thing. And I mean, it's kind of a contradiction because people are thinking they're going to live forever,
Right.
and they're not planning for the future at the same time, right? So they're saying, okay, well, I don't need to worry about COVID because it's not that bad. It's not going to hurt me. While we're telling people, hey, this could take you out at any moment. You could get COVID, and 6 months later, no matter what physical shape you're in, you could have a heart attack or stroke or whatever else. So they're saying, hey, we're going to live for today, YOLO. And they're saying, I'm going to live forever because why I'm not afraid. So,
Mhm.
there's no way COVID's that bad. I'll live till I'm 80, right? But then
Yeah.
you're just not, right? And I mean that's the sort of cockiness that humanity has uh,
Yeah.
gained over the years. It wasn't
Very
always like
arrogant.
right, yeah, because back in the day you didn't live till you're 80. If you lived till you're 80, you were like the village elder, and like they made a statue of you
Yeah.
because expectancy was very low, right? So and also back in the day they were more prone to doing what they had to do. I mean, Spanish flu was different. They had the same sort of cavalier approach and premature celebration of the Spanish flu being over as we have with COVID.
Yeah.
So the World War I ended, and they had parades, and they were like, "Yay!" And all that did was just blow it up even more. And that's kind of what we did. We got vaccines. That
Hmm.
was the end of our World War I. We celebrated. We beat the virus. Not even close, right? The virus was. We're in way worse shape now than we ever were. Doesn't matter, the vaccine. We could get everybody on the planet to take a COVID vaccine tomorrow. There's too much damage already done to
Hmm.
hundreds of millions. If you're looking at 409 million with long COVID now, which is probably an undercount, what's it going to be like in 3 years from now? 5, 10 years? Are you kidding? So, with the probability, it just looks like everyone is going to have long COVID at some point. Now,
Right.
some might have the availability of proper health care and tailored medicines and whatever else, just like with HIV that we saw in the past, right? So
Mhm.
there's certain people who got HIV in the 80s and didn't die, and there's lots of people who did, right? So if you had the money, if you had the availability of healthcare, if you had all the things at your disposal, you had a way better chance. Now it's not, not everybody who had money survived HIV or AIDS. but there's lots of examples of it, right? And that's the same thing is happening
Mhm.
now. Is so if one of us gets COVID and we need to see a doctor, we go sit in an ER for 12 hours, sometimes 17 hours. There's people dying because they're waiting so long.
Right.
While rich folk, they just call up their doctor and they walk right in, right?
Hmm.
So, but again, people don't see those, the lack of equity in, the availability of services when
Right.
something like this is going on. All they see is we don't got to wear masks because the
Yeah.
pandemic's over. We're going for Wing Wednesday, but that could cause you a lot of damage.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned long COVID. I think that's important to touch on too. And just this morning, I saw a tweet from someone talking about their personal experience. And so, personal experience, to me, it's not research, it's not scientific, but it has tremendous value, and it's sometimes the best thing we have. And
Big
this
time.
person was saying that everyone they know who has had COVID has some kind of lingering symptom years later.
Yeah, I mean, and you're going to see that. And again, it all ties into the education, right? So if you're fighting in a war, and I use that, metaphor, simile, whatever, all the time. If you're
Yeah.
fighting a war, and you don't educate your soldiers, you don't even teach them how to load a gun, you're not going to win. Like you can't, right? So what we're doing right now is okay. So public health is, they're skating uphill, and they're saying, okay, we need to do this, and you need to get vaccinated, and whatever else. It's not going to be enough, right? So it's like
Mhm.
throwing handfuls of sand at an oncoming flood. It's not going to do anything, right? It's a nice gesture, but you can get vaccinated today and get infected in a month, you know,
Right.
and it might reduce your chances of long COVID or it might not. So if everything is a Hail Mary and if everything's a roll of the dice, then what do you got to do? You got to change up the game, or you got to change the casino, or change the dice, right? You don't just keep rolling and going, okay, these are loaded dice, and I think I'll
Mhm.
still win even if I'm rolling them. You got to do something differently. So this whole we'll vaccinate sometime some people. That's not going to do anything, right? We need to
Right.
actually address the issue and educate. And if you told people, if and it has to come from our leadership. It can't come
Right.
from just rogue people like us, right?
Right.
Because yeah, it doesn't matter how genuine and how truthful and how accurate we are. Again, that sort of contradiction comes into play where they don't believe the government, they don't believe doctors and science unless they tell them, on the news or whatever else, right?
Yeah.
It might even be too late for a lot of people. Like
Yeah.
even if all of our leaders did come out and say, "Listen, long COVID is dangerous," whatever, people are still going to go, "Yeah, right. I don't care." And it goes back to, well, only homosexual people can get HIV or AIDS,
Right.
right? And how many people are dead because of that, right? Because of that way of thinking. Or,
Hmm.
the blood can't be tainted. It's at the hospital. They wouldn't give us, you know what I mean? It's just this blind sort of um, like trust, I guess it is, because you should be able to trust your healthcare leaders. I mean, it's a wild concept that,
Yeah.
in ancient times, they could trust their leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, but long COVID, I mean, that's your long COVID to me is like it's Friday and everybody's having some fun, whatever. You're gonna go out for pizzas and watch some movies till 4, but you've got a
Mhm.
huge exam on Monday,
Right.
right? And you would do the things you want to do, but you always had that feeling in your stomach where it was like,
Yeah.
I know this is coming and
I
it's
should do better.
yeah, and you're like, but I gotta go and live my life. But that exam is on Monday. Well, most people are not ready for that exam, and that exam is coming in the form of you didn't wear a mask for a year. Now you have a new chronic illness in some form, right? You have a
Right.
new condition that you got to deal with for the rest of your life, or even if it's only 3 years. Can you imagine if someone was like, "Hey, you're gonna have an itch in your ear for 3 years"?
Yeah.
And that like weird things like that happen to people who get COVID and long COVID, right? So but again, because we're not connecting the dots for people on the media level, so in our governmental level, people are walking around like, yeah, I can't smell 2 years.
Yeah.
No big deal. That's brain damage. I had a friend who fell off
That's
of the back of a car when we were kids. He fell off the back of a car because a guy just floored it or whatever. He was just sitting on the
Yeah.
hood or whatever. Hit his head, lost his sense of taste and smell, sued the insurance company because it was brain damage, right?
Yeah.
So now we have the airborne version of that, and loads
Yeah.
of people, like, oh, it's hilarious. I can't taste anything for 2 years now. It's like, you think that's hilarious? Like, so what if it's the sensation in your fingers goes away and you can't feel things normally anymore
Yeah.
because of circulation, like I've heard people say, or your eyes because optical like eye damage has been happening in a lot of people. Hearing loss happening in a lot of people.
Hmm.
Some people can't speak at
Yeah.
at normal levels anymore. Like these things are not like, wow, that's hilarious. If you go back to the 90s and you're like, hey, if you do that, you
Yeah.
won't be able to smell anymore, people would be like, I'm not doing that then. So, yeah. So, I mean, again, it's the education piece. We got to do something about the education gap.
It's as if people have these bad side effects from COVID. They can't taste anymore, they can't smell anymore, and they are afraid to acknowledge it in a way. And then there's kind of this ongoing issue where I've seen articulated lots of different ways on Twitter where they think that they'll get sick, go to the doctor, and get healed, and they don't know that like people like me who have had migraines forever and have all kinds of other chronic pain, that it's not fun. That I mean, I would rather not have those issues, and so it's like they don't know what it's like to be disabled. They don't know what they're potentially sacrificing as their possible long COVID or various symptoms get worse and worse.
Yeah, I mean, and we all take our health for granted. I mean, every time I've ever been sick with the flu or whatever before COVID came around, I'm laying there going, I'm going to eat healthier, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to take
Yeah.
more vitamins. We've all done that. It's like if you go drinking and you're hungover the next day, people are like, I'm never going drinking again. I'm going to blah, blah. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to do it all. I should have drank water before I went to bed. Like we always, we have those regrets, right? But we always get that chip back on our shoulder and go, oh, yeah, it can't happen to me, right?
Yeah.
Everything that's ever happened to somebody has thought to themselves, it can't happen to me because, unless it's like a freak accident out of nowhere that you can't control, somebody who's going bungee jumping thinks it could never happen to me, right? But if the cord
Right.
snaps, it's like, wow, it's a tragedy. Yeah, so we have that cockiness, right? And unfortunately, it's not working to help us because we think it can't happen to me. But in this case, the prevalence and, if you're up over 400 million people in the world who have symptoms, and
Hmm.
there's loads more who are hiding it because you have this kind of double whammy of stubbornness and guilt, right? So if you said to your kids, "Hey, we're going to go to Florida or whatever on a trip. We're not wearing masks on the plane," and one of them gets symptoms that are lasting like 8 months, obviously as a parent you're going to have guilt, right?
Yeah.
And then you have that stubbornness where you can't let that be the reason, right? You have to keep up your front. You have to stay strong to the path you chose, no matter what.
Mhm.
If there's two paths in the woods, and you're like, this one is the one we're going on,
Right.
it doesn't matter how bad that road is going to get, and we've seen it a million times with stubborn
Yeah.
dads or whatever, right? You're going down that road, right? Because you can't admit that you were wrong, and we have that. That's a fault of humanity. Is most people can't go, I made a mistake, I got to turn it around, right? They will just keep on pressing on. And I mean, historically, that's gotten millions and millions of people into trouble. And what we're seeing now is if that happens to a kid or that happens to a family member or ourselves, we don't want to admit that we got ourselves into trouble because we were being
Right.
careless, we weren't listening, or weren't educating ourselves properly on whatever we were doing, right? So the stubbornness, and then, well, actually, it's three things, and then it's the fear, right? You don't want to admit that something scares you, and the best way to do that is to push on through, right? It's why you see horror movies where you look down the creepy hallway and they're
Hmm.
like, they should just turn around because they're terrified. No, I'm going to keep on
I
pushing.
never learn.
No, and no one's ever learned in the history of mankind. Run to the car, right? Just
Right.
turn around, run to the car, right? And learn how to use your keys before you get there. Because in every horror movie, people don't know how to use their keys they've used a million times,
Hmm.
right? And yeah, I mean, in this case, we have the tools, we have the education or the info, and we need to up the education and that the mitigation will fall into place. If you educate everybody on what the real dangers of COVID are, and that if you get this once, you could get symptoms that last 3 months, 6 months, 5 years,
Right.
forever. They're going to be like, right? It's if you bought a bike helmet for your kids, then you care about your kids, right? So why don't you care about them avoiding the same type of brain injury or worse from breathing in their classroom,
Right.
from hanging out with a kid who just has the sniffles. Timmy's always blowing his nose.
Hmm.
Yeah, right. Things have to change, right? It's before The Walking Dead started, and somebody got bit on the arm by a friend,
Hmm.
who cares? But after the presence of zombies was known, if someone got bit on the on the hand by a friend,
Hmm.
probably wouldn't hang out with them just to see, right?
Yeah.
You'd probably be like, yeah, right,
People have to learn and adapt and
yeah, and we're not adapting, right? And that's the hardest part because we're squandering so much of an opportunity for because we have such tools, right? If this is back in the day, it'd be a lot harder to tell everybody on the planet, hey, this is the damage
yeah.
that whatever can do, right? I'm assuming that back in the day, if they had our tech, our communication tools, they probably would have snuffed out Spanish flu immediately. But I mean, back then it was just newspapers, right? Word of mouth. Um, like when you look at communication as a tool against any enemy, uh,
Hmm.
back in World War I and II, the communication was primitive. It was garbage compared to what we have now. If they could communicate like we can now, I mean, wars would have been, whoever had the best comms won.
Right.
We have the greatest network of communication ever conceived. I mean, why are so many people in the dark with
Hmm.
all the availability and of info and ability to share it? Why are so many people still going, what do you mean COVID's still around? It's
Right.
like,
Perfect.
right, like we can put millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into Coke ads, Coca-Cola, right?
Mhm.
When arguably you don't even need to advertise Coke anymore. Like
Yeah. Everyone knows Coca-Cola.
everybody knows it's there, right? It's like you don't see Q-tip commercials, but there's loads of people buying Q-tips all the time, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to advertise that stuff. So if we use like a tenth of the advertising money that consumer products use and corporations use to educate people on COVID, we'd be the healthiest we ever were, even before
Hmm.
COVID. But instead, we're doing nothing, and we get scattered reports from media once in a while, and no real push because even at the media level, even at the government level,
Hmm.
you got those same three things working against you, right? You got the fear, you got the stubbornness, and that guilt, right?
Hmm.
And then so we have all that stuff as well as advocates, but we also have the grief because we are dealing with the loss of all the things that we've lost, right? So
Right.
we know that there's things that won't go back to normal for a long time, if ever. We know that there's hundreds of millions of people who are now chronically ill who may never recover. We know that there's excess deaths off the charts, right? So in Alberta, I think it was they lost, 130 people or 230 people to the flu and then like 700 to COVID, right? That's grief inducing stuff when you hear that. And
Yeah.
when you know a lot of it is attributed to the lack of information and the unwillingness to share that info and fear and ignorance that are causing that hesitancy, that's hard to deal with, right? It's
Hmm.
brutal. It sucks. I want to have the biggest barbecue ever and invite everybody I ever met on Twitter and be like,
Right.
fly to Newfoundland. I don't care. Sleep in the
I'll
in
be
the
there when COVID's over.
yeah, right. And when COVID's over for real,
When, keyword.
this thing, I'm going to throw the biggest party the world's ever seen, right? But until then, we really need to make sure that there's somebody to party with when the time comes, right?
Yeah.
Because there are advocates out there, but even in our community, we're getting infected,
Hmm.
because we're walking through minefields that increase every day. It's like, oh yeah, that field used to have 50 mines in it. Well, today it's 100. Why is there
Yeah.
100 there now? Because nobody will do anything to stop it, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and that's where
And
you know,
I mean, thinking about people, even people being careful who are getting infected. One of my, very, very best friends, like a brother. I mean, we haven't seen each other since before COVID started because of COVID. I mean, just the timing hasn't worked out and it's not safe. He always masked everywhere. He
Yep.
needed to go to a really important doctor's appointment. They wouldn't do it on Zoom, made him come into the office. He was the only one masked, none of the nurses masked, none of the physicians masked, and he got COVID and for the first time a couple months ago. And
See, that's brutal. It should
it's
never
not
happen.
fair. Right.
Nope. Should never happen. If you had somebody who was like, this person's been traumatized by PTSD, could you stop, firing off these firecrackers in the gymnasium? People would be like, oh yeah, sorry about that. But when you're like, hey, I don't want to catch a virus that could kill my brain, nope, we will not accommodate that. And
Yeah.
to me, that's troubling because even if you don't believe in COVID, you should believe in mental health and you should go, okay, I'm a medical professional and I will accommodate these people. Even if I think they're completely out of their minds, oh, you want me to wear a mask, cuckoo. In terms of working with kids with special needs when I was a teacher, accommodation and finding a way to make the world comfortable for kids who are on the spectrum is what I do. That's my bread and butter, right?
Right.
So to see somebody who's in the medical profession go, no, we're not going to do that for you when you could do it just to humor them. To me, that's spiteful,
Yeah.
and that goes beyond the ignorance, and that goes beyond whatever they're grappling with. They should just go, yeah, no problem, we'll do that for you because give
Sure.
it 15 minutes, right? 15 minutes out of your day, you can't make somebody's day better. To me, that's gross.
Yeah. So I guess we've already touched on this in great ways, but I guess like maybe to summarize, what does your ultimate idea of justice look like with healthcare? Since this is, for a justice class and justice in healthcare class, so kind of what is your ideal, what is your picture of justice look like whenever I'm responding to COVID?
We have to, like, our healthcare leaders and administrators and whatever else have to follow their own rules. They just have to go by the book. They have to
Yeah,
look at the precautionary principle. They have to look at viral mitigation rules. They have to look at occupational health and safety. This isn't a extra ask. This is a follow your own rules, right?
hmm,
So, if you're refereeing a game of basketball and all the players are referees, right? Like, and they're like, "What do you mean that's a foul?"
yeah,
You'd be like, what the heck is wrong with you? You know the rules. You uphold these rules all the time. It's pretty simple. Like, just
sure,
give people, you have to promote equality in the form of protect everybody, even if there's no one there that needs protecting, right?
hmm,
Which includes yourself. The precautionary principle, if it's the foundation of what you're doing, then you assume everybody who walks into a hospital has COVID as soon as they walk in there,
right,
despite the fact that we know, 50%, whatever, higher is asymptomatic infection, never develops one symptom.
right,
Like, seems fine. Like, I'm great, given like 40 people COVID, right? And also, the professional um, standard needs to be back there. I mean, just because you went to med school or you went to school to be a nurse or a specialist doesn't mean you can't learn more, right? The game changed. We have a new player. It's COVID, right?
right,
So you have to learn how to play the game with the new player, right? It's
hmm,
you get like Victor Wembanyama in NBA or Wayne Gretzky. These people that come along in sports all the time who change the game. That's
right,
COVID. We're not changing to adhere to that difference, right? And
hmm.
we're not even using our baseline strategies against those newcomers, right? It
It's
just
a great
doesn't
way
make
to put
sense.
it. That's just a really great way to put it, that the game has changed and people need to respond.
Yeah, I mean, you don't just say, okay, well, this worked for whoever last year, right? There's
Hmm.
somebody new on the court, on the ice, on the field, whatever, right? Again, if you're fighting a war and you're like, okay, we got the enemy on the ropes, and then the enemy all of a sudden has a new ally who comes in and they're way more deadly and stealth, and they're just sneaky and they're good at it, and they got
Right.
snipers and whatever else. You just can't keep up the same method of warfare and expect to keep winning, especially
Hmm.
when you see, you don't want to admit it, but the new battalion that's taking out people, you're not going to admit that that's what it is, right?
Hmm.
Because the war's over and our enemy is nice now. No. right? We wouldn't allow that to happen. We didn't allow that to happen uh,
Exactly.
throughout history, right? Yeah. So
Thank you. I guess anything else, kind of the last question, and I would love to hear a little bit about the work you've done with mental health and the 80 summer camp project. And
yeah, I mean, I think if with COVID, we got to get that education piece out there at all costs. That's kind of what I'm trying to do. My various fundraisers and whatever else is just
right,
be there for people and start doing like weekly educational chats. And I want to approach schools with different info and give presentations online, or if I can do it outside, I'll go and do it outside and just let people know, hey, here's the dangers of COVID. Why am I
right,
wearing a mask? I'm not bonkers. I just don't want to catch this virus that
right.
could cause this and this. And then I also want to use my platforms to get that message out in different ways, right? So that's why I'll write a parody song, or I'll write a
Yeah.
poem, or I'll do a video, or whatever it takes, right? It's because we have to appeal to people in pretty much every different way that we can.
And where they are, kind of like where they're ready
Exactly.
or where they
Yeah.
will go to get information.
And like you brought up something earlier where you said, the kids they haven't given us consent. Because I guarantee you, if you sat kids down and said, these are the different things that can happen from a COVID-19 infection,
Hmm.
do you think we should have masking in your school or not?
Yeah.
You're going to have high 90s saying, we don't want that to happen, right?
Hmm.
If you
Kids are
say,
smart. I mean,
and
kids are
yeah,
much smarter than they get credit for.
and they don't allow their personal histories because they're shorter. They don't have that. Their level of selfishness is usually lower than adults, right? They haven't
Yeah.
had years to grow that, and also like deficiencies cause different levels of selfishness. So if you didn't get a lot of something when you were younger, you want to hoard all of whatever you didn't get. And it's not to say that people, selfish tendencies are not evil or bad, in every way. But kids for the most part are more generous and more willing to
Mhm.
go community wise, right?
Right.
You tell them, hey, if we do this, all the kids that are sick usually, less of them will be sick. Like, or hey, do you remember the last time you were sick? And they're like, yeah, for sure. Well, you were sick 4 times last year. How would you like it if you were only sick once or
Yeah.
never? They'd be like, how do I do that? Right?
Hmm.
Because they're much more. There's no politics with kids. It doesn't matter if Republicans or Democrats or conservatives or liberals talk to them about masks.
Hmm.
They don't care, right? It doesn't matter. Yeah, so we got to get that education piece in there because, like you said, kids they haven't consented to anything. We haven't told them the truth, right?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so 80 Summer Camp was a thing that I started in 2016. I lived in Fort McMurray, Alberta at the time, and one of the biggest wildfires in Canadian history burned like 1,600 buildings in our city.
Wow.
Yeah, walls of fire on both sides of the highway. We were escaping. Um, and short of one shift of wind, we were in the danger zone sort of thing, right?
Wow.
So it was gridlock for 14 hours on the highway to get maybe 120 kilometers away, right? So it was crawl speed. We were barely moving. Most people were running out of gas and things like that.
Hmm.
And right then I was thinking, hey, what can I do to make people feel better? Right. Because I knew
Right.
there was going to be a landslide of mental health issues after, we were seeing houses burning and buildings blowing up and stuff like that. So as we were escaping the fire, I got a call from my mother-in-law that my wife's dad, who was sick with cancer, had only a couple of days left to live. So we're getting out of the city, walls of fire on both sides of the highway,
Mm.
propane tanks blowing up, water bombers coming over top. Our son was only 2, and he was in the back crying. It was a very frantic, crazy day.
Sure.
And then we get the call, oh, your dad's gonna die. So we're like, that's the bottom. Like you get pretty
Yeah.
low in life, but we're like, holy hell, like what the hell do I do? So then I was like, okay, I got to do something. I got to take everybody's mind off of this. So I started putting down my window when we got away from the smoke and just doing comedy to random strangers on the highway.
Yeah.
Like I,
Cool.
I was like, you ever been Susudio'd? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, hit it. And I get my wife to hit the song Sussudio by Phil Collins and just sing along. It's a girl that's been on my mind all the time. And people were just cracking up laughing, right? And like I'd pull up to the next car and be like, how can I just let you walk away? Like just singing to them, and they're like, "What is this guy doing?" And
That's
they
amazing.
we had a great time. So I was like, I need to snowball this positivity. So then I started making funny videos. We escaped to a town where my sister lived, like I don't know, like 800 kilometers away, and we got there, and some guy gave us a house for the summer out of nowhere. He goes,
Wow.
he saw us at Walmart, and he goes, you guys escaping from Fort Mac? And we were like, yeah. And he's like, where are you staying? I was like, well, we're going to bunk up my sister's or whatever. He goes, I'll have my rental house cleaned up for you in 2 days and you can have it. I was like, have it
It's
for how long?
incredible.
And he's like, as long as you want. He's like, we'll go a year cap. He goes, I was like, a year? Like, who is this guy? He was like the greatest guy ever. And then his kindness got me going, okay, I need to pay it forward and like be a spark plug. Right. So then I started making videos every day, like, hey guys, you're awesome and stay strong and whatever. And then like about 6 months later, I started making t-shirts, and then I got celebrities to wear them and just tell people they were awesome, and
Cool.
got snowballing. And then my favorite one ever, my son one night when I was waiting for him to go to sleep goes, why don't you message Jack Black? And I was like, I'll try, buddy, but I doubt it, right? I go, I already emailed his people like 15 times. He goes, do it one more time, Dad. He goes, Jack Black's really cool. I like him in Jumanji. So I go, all right. So I sent one more email. Next morning, they're like, sure, Jack would love a shirt. I was like, yeah,
Very,
woohoo!
very nice.
Went nuts, right? So, but basically, the whole backbone of 80 Summer Camp uh, was always, unfortunately, grassroots activities, getting people together, right? And then COVID hit, I couldn't do that, right? So it sucked.
Yeah.
I still did like online things, had online celebration where I got like Canadian celebrities to do songs and speak to people and stuff like that. And then I got really into the COVID advocacy after my son got COVID, and then he forgot words, and he was, like he was a like Siri when he was younger. His vocabulary was off the charts, and he was forgetting like normal, like easy to say words.
Mm.
So I was like, yeah, I got to switch gears. I got to focus a lot on COVID stuff. But now I'm going to kind of trickle back into mental health stuff and get people, people in our community and whatever community, feeling good about themselves again, right? And just go,
Yeah.
things do suck some days, but you're awesome, because that's my catchphrase. You're awesome, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, so we're going to have some, group Zoom chats and like vent sessions and karaoke, and I'm going to do some comedy again. Keep shooting cool videos, keep up with the education on COVID. I'm going to fight against the government. And yeah,
Awesome. You have my vote, but run for whatever and I'll vote.
right. And that's what, because that's what we got to do, right? We do focus a lot on the negativity, but one positive that's come out of all this COVID advocacy is we got a big group of people who, we don't know each other, but we could all know each other, right?
Right.
Why not? And we could, add positivity to each other's lives, and we can feel good in a bad situation, and we can, look on the bright side. Some days it's just so dark you just can't, right? Um,
Yeah.
but and I get caught up in it too, right? But I got to start doing more positive posts and sharing that we're in a war, right? But even in war times, there's joy, right? You're seeing pictures of kids out playing soccer and giving flowers to soldiers in the Ukraine, and there's terrible things going on in the world right now, right? So
Yeah.
as bad as any of us have it, somebody else has it really, really, much more, serious than we do, right? We got stuff going on in Gaza. And I mean, there's been wars going on forever, and there's been
Hmm.
poverty, and there's been abuse and evil things always, right? So even on our worst day, we do have it better than somebody else, right? And
Right.
that doesn't cancel out your feelings and your anger and your grief, but it helps to put it in perspective to at least give you that push to go, okay, I can make my day a little better. I can rock and roll. I had a great day yesterday. I watched. It's rare, but I watched a good movie like last week.
What movie did you watch?
No, no, that's hypothetical. I haven't seen a good movie in years.
Okay.
They just don't make them anymore. It's like, if you
Yeah.
want to watch a good movie, you better dial it back to the 80s or 90s, early 2000s, because it just ain't going to happen for you.
Yeah, things culture and the what they're producing is changed and
Yeah, it's pretty generic. It's pretty regular chips, is what I call it. Regular potato chips. When people ask me, "What's that movie like?" Yeah, it's regular chips. It's it filled the gap, but you're like, you'd rather have ketchup, like anybody,
yeah.
any person would, or barbecue, or.
Sure. Well,
But
what's your Twitter handles? And I'll put up a thing on the screen too, or a link where people can click on it if they want to follow you. And
I don't remember what mine. I think it's Keith Muise, KeetMuise.
okay, I'll put a thing on the video on the screen that'll come up. All right, let me
Cool.
stop the recording and then let's see.